A truly equitable society is one that's based on inclusion, and inclusion can seem a very broad topic, but actually for me in my work, inclusion's really been about thinking, how do we bring more diverse voices into the conversation around inclusion? How do we truly understand what different people need to feel included, what it truly means to be accepted, to have a good sense of belonging? So facilitating dialogue is so important. I don't think dialogue needs to always be a top-down initiative. Some of the most powerful dialogue in fostering a sense of belonging happens just between people in their everyday interactions. So we need to try and think about how we can build a structure that facilitates these types of exchanges. When you bring people together, often what happens is they realise how many common values they have, how much commonality they have. And this in itself can foster a sense of inclusion, especially in diverse societies where often there are long-standing barriers between groups. Inclusion between these people often depends on fostering a positive sense of dialogue. So it also is about us as researchers learning about what are the barriers to inclusion, what really stops people feeling included, and how can we go about facilitating change around those areas. But it's also about what fosters inclusion. You know, only when I've gone out into communities, my own community even, I've learned, you know, what is it that really makes people feel included every day? A lot of my research to date has focused on the role of identity. And I find that identity is such an important part of inclusion. And in that research, I've looked a lot at the role of national identity. So I looked at this concept of Britishness, and I did lots of research in London with minority ethnic young people, and I found that those young people that felt that they were accepted in British society, they felt that they were included, were those that also felt the happiest. Fostering a positive sense of national identity is really crucial, I think, in creating a common sense of belonging. When you have a diverse society, as we do here in the UK, if we're able to bring together people to create a vision for who we are as a people going forward, that touches upon perhaps the positive aspects of the past, that form of national identity could be extremely inclusive. With the COVID-19 pandemic, one thing we have seen, especially in the work that I'm doing around faith communities, is the extremely high level of community social action that's been going on. So is there a way to take this forward? You know, we can come together, we can create commonality, and sometimes in moments of crisis, that's when actually people feel very high levels of inclusion. So is there a way that we can facilitate this work going forward? Can we harness this to create a sense of common culture, a sense of national belonging that will be more inclusive in the future? A truly inclusive society is one that represents the diversity of its people. So representation is really key in creating a more inclusive future. We need to make sure that we don't always have the same voices having these conversations. We need to make sure that we learn more about what people need, what fosters inclusion and belonging, but we need to hear different voices in that debate. So one way that we could achieve this is perhaps having more of a citizens' assembly type structure. Lots of people I meet in communities do amazing work at the grassroots level. They're out there, they're building networks, they're finding vulnerable people to support. So they themselves are organising themselves around these issues. And then you have like government policy around community cohesion, inclusion and belonging, even the British values agenda. But how do we bridge these two groups of people that are trying to do similarly the same thing, you know, create a more inclusive society? So a citizens' assembly is something that I find myself talking about with other people a lot. And this would be more like a mid-level structure between grassroots community activists and government that brings together, that promotes that dialogue, that is representative. And that would be a way to continually make sure that these conversations feed into the right places and that they're coming from the communities too. Sometimes we find ourselves going back to the same place to get that diverse voice. And I think, especially as a researcher, one of the things that's really important to me is to make sure that I bring new voices into that conversation. I think it's amazing the way that young people have really harnessed the last few years in particular to let their voices, their collective voice, be heard around the future that they want. Some of the research I've done at the LSE has shown us that young people actually, they have a more inclusive sense of the future. They're worried about their own rights, but they're also worried about the rights of others. And being an equal society, an equitable society, is very high on their agenda. And we see them organising themselves and taking to the streets. So I think what we need to do is try and find a way of how can we support young people in this fight? What can we do to help them continually strive for a more inclusive future? And certainly, I think one of the things that we try to do is we try to use our networks and our positions to further their cause. And I think we need to try and be, proactive about this all the time and not just reactive when something bad happens. I think we need to continually strive to empower young people to shape the future how they want. And the way that they see the future is more inclusive. So I think we as researchers and academics and policymakers, practitioners, whatever we do, we need to try and work closely with young people to use our resources to support them. I think there has been this kind of intergenerational breakdown as well, especially after Brexit, where younger people have kind of said, well, we have a completely different set of values to some older people, and this is an example of it. But actually, we need to go beyond that now. And I think there is a lot of intergenerational consensus around, rights and equality. And I think I think for the public, it's time to kind of try and build that bridge now. And again, that can be done through dialogue. And I want to emphasise that dialogue doesn't have to be something super structured. It doesn't have to be an academic discussion. It really is, some of the most powerful ways to create inclusion and foster conversations and dialogue is just those conversations you have with your neighbour or your friends. So I think having those conversations and talking about the future is really important. Some of the research that I've done is, showing that actually even within families, these conversations between generations have kind of, stalled or broken down. So I think now, especially as we hopefully come out of a time of unprecedented crisis, is the time to renew these conversations. I think we should really try and harness this opportunity to work together and build those conversations between older and younger generations and just, have our support around that. So one of the, I think, practical ways that we can do this, and something that we talk about a lot as a team, is how can we continue to close that gap between academia and the communities that we work with. And I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to go beyond just actually researching communities. And communities shouldn't just be the subject of our research, but they should be more involved in the whole research process. So one way to do that, I think, is to train and mentor young people from different communities to become researchers, to tell us more about their lives, how they want to build a more inclusive society, and then feed that into our research. So it's more of a collaborative research that I envisage going forward, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment, where we work with young people from faith communities. We bring them into our research, we bring them into the conversation, we ask them what we can do as researchers to help them. And I really like this way of working because it breaks down that divide between researchers and communities, but also academia and the world that we live in, which is so important. And social science is an amazing tool. This is why I found myself, doing this job and doing this work, because I am from one of those communities, and feeling like my voice matters has been incredibly empowering for me. And I want to try and give other people a chance to be involved in this type of work if that's what they want. By bringing more voices to discussions around inclusions, we understand inclusion better. We understand the nuances of it. We understand what facilitates it, what hinders it. And then we can build that into our research and hopefully influence different sectors that are trying to facilitate this through their own work. If we can continue to create space for dialogue between and within groups and be mindful of representation, and think about the role of identity and belonging whilst working with young people on all three of these, we can truly achieve a more inclusive future.